Gurmagad Gahirach, and I, like previous speakers, want to welcome our guests here today and thank them for their statements and confirm I'm in Leinster House as well. I suppose a lot of points have been made at this stage, and I want to agree with the ones around the optional protocol. It should have been ratified at the same time as the convention. But I do welcome a timeline for its ratification next year. That's very important. And a lot of the other points made around how COVID has affected society and particularly people with disabilities have been well made, and we all know that. And this is an opportunity perhaps to have a look at how different bodies are run and supports are given, and try and improve it for the better and prevent something like that ever happening again. I have a couple of questions here about funding. I suppose I have a specific one about funding for the IHREC itself. I mean, have sufficient funding and resources been provided to carry out the role as independent monitoring of the implementation of the convention, because it's so important? And I suppose we've talked about different departments, and all of them have a role in implementing the convention. This committee has written to the different departments, and while some have responded with a very comprehensive outline of what they see as their role in implementing, others leave a lot to be desired, to be perfectly honest. So it's just how departments are working together and how to ensure that they all carry out their role. And also, can sufficient funding and planning for UNCRPD implementation be achieved without key documents such as the Indicon report on the cost of disability and the disability capacity review? Like, those reports are both completed, I believe, and yet they haven't been published. And I think it's very important that they would be, because there is a deficit in data on disability in our country. And how do you provide for people in need if you don't know where the need is and where the funding is needed? And I just have a quick question for Fergal as well. You mentioned the Irish Sign Language Act in your statement there, and it's just something I've been asked about quite a bit. Irish Sign Language was recognised as a state language in 2017, and yet despite a 4-year honours degree course in Trinity in deaf studies, it's not accepted as a subject by the Teaching Council, and it's not accepted on our curriculum. And I'm wondering, is that going to happen? People are very anxious to know, will Irish Sign Language be taught in our schools to our students? Thank you.
Much. Now, Fergal.
Thanks, Deputy, and I'm sure Commissioner Gibney would like to come in on a number of points. Perhaps she might want to comment particularly on the funding for IREC, and I'm sure she'll have a view on that. In relation to some of the other issues on the Irish Sign Language Act, we'll pursue that one. I'm not familiar with what the exact position is in relation to that, but given that the Act is now commenced, hopefully that approach should be possible. Perhaps just to deal with a couple of the other issues in relation to departmental roles, we are very conscious different departments have very different roles in relation to this. As you'd expect in many areas of cross-government cooperation, some departments are very, very enthusiastic and interactive, and perhaps some not so. We have a similar experience in other areas such as early years, such as youth services and so on. So it is a challenge to encourage full participation by all. I think our implementation plan for the UN Convention, one of the areas that we will look at is what is the best architecture and what's the best way of encouraging cooperation and collaboration between departments, because it's absolutely vital to get all of this right. If I may just comment on a couple of things that Commissioner Gibney mentioned earlier, because I think they're very important, and just to respond and agree with a number of things that she has said. In the context of the human rights and public sector duty, it's interesting, the Minister is actually going to be speaking this afternoon on that very topic for local government reports that's being launched by Disability Federation Ireland. I think that's an IREC funded initiative. We also place a great emphasis on it, and in our own department's statement of strategy, we placed a very specific emphasis and had a specific addendum setting out our approach to that requirement, and we regard it as of particular importance. And I think that's going to grow in emphasis in other departments as the awareness around it grows. Just in terms of some funding issues, I would say the new round of European Social Fund prioritises funding for employment and training. So in terms of funding and supporting employment and training of people with disabilities, the new round of European Social Fund monies prioritises that, and we'll be very much pushing that as much as we possibly can. In terms of response to disability during COVID, I take the points that Adam Harris made in relation to how people with disability were treated and the experiences that they had. Certainly we laid a great emphasis on supporting as much as we possibly could. I know that disability organisations, for example, were represented on a vulnerable persons subgroup that NEFIT established, and we took close involvement in that as well. As a department, we certainly put a lot of effort into coordinating and communicating with people, with organisations and people with a disability, and people representing people with a disability, to keep them in the loop in relation to initiatives and in relation to what was happening as the pandemic continued. And in fact, I think it's probably true to say that we ended up developing an even stronger relationship with a number of organisations on foot of that. Of course, I accept that there's much more to be done in that regard. In terms of publication of reports, I know that Minister Abbott and Minister O'Gorman are anxious to publish the capacity review as soon as they possibly can, and there's work is being done on a framework for an action plan. So that report certainly should be published in the not too distant future, and I absolutely take the point that that forms a very important backdrop to what needs to happen for the future. So they were my responses to the various points raised. Thanks.
Okay.
Sinead? I mean, in terms of our funding first, so we are a merged institution and equality and human rights institution. And just to give you a bit of context, we are only now at the same size as one of our former legacy bodies, the bigger legacy body, the Equality Authority, was in 2008, which was a single mandate organisation. And so we are at a point where we have had a straight budget for the last number of years, as we've been able to develop, I suppose, as an organisation and build as an organisation. But we are now turning into what we describe in the human rights and equality world as a multi-mandate organisation, where we are taking on new mandates, such as this independent monitoring mechanism, similarly the coordinator role for the mechanism for the OPCAT, and we also this year took on the role of domestic rapporteur for anti-trafficking. So we are at an inflection point, is where I would describe, where we will be seeking increases in our budget and an expansion of our overall organisation over the coming years. So it's helpful to be able to put that out today, actually. So thank you for asking the question. But we are absolutely ready, as we are, to act as independent monitoring mechanism. But I think it is something that we will be growing as an organisation over the coming years. I'm also very happy that you raised the issue of data. This is something that we are continuing to speak on in every forum, I feel like, where I'm at. I mean, it's absolutely central to the ability to measure and monitor CRPD implementation. As a national human rights and equality institution, it's critical for all that we do. What we cannot measure, we cannot change. And we do not have, at the moment, enough disaggregated data in this country for us to effectively identify which groups are being affected by which policies and effectively address those. A notable feature of the UNCRPD is Article 31, which stipulates that states must collect appropriate statistical data relating to people with disabilities. So we have been calling for this. The OECD, the EU and the UN are consistently calling on public bodies to collect and publish disaggregated data. What we're coming up against when we do that is a response from the state around the CRP or the GDPR and privacy data, which they believe is a barrier to that. And we hold a very strong and clear position that that is not the case, that the collection and publication of this data can be done within the legal confines of data protection law, because it is being done for non-discrimination and for equality and for driving the equality agenda. I mean, indeed, the failure to maintain disaggregated data, it doesn't only run the risk of concealing these human rights and equality violations, it is in itself a significant breach of international human rights law that the state currently runs. So I think it's really important to continue to push for better collection and publication of aggregated data. And we've put forward recommendations around this, around how the CSO, for example, can play a part in this. You know, we work with departments to help push on this, but we're happy to provide any more information that could be helpful. And just to answer, I suppose, as the Secretary General mentioned, and it's great to see the public sector duty appearing in the department's strategy statement. Unfortunately, we did an audit and 80% of departments were actually not yet in compliance in their most recent round of strategy statements. So again, public sector duty is something that we really need to push for. Thanks.
If I may, on one point that I forgot to mention, and thanks to Commissioner Gibney for mentioning it, and that was raising it, that was in relation to data, and I absolutely totally agree with her points in that regard. And just to confirm, in the first instance, the National Disability Authority has begun a disability data audit, and it's reviewing key elements of its own internal operations in this area of data management to establish its key objectives in this area. And it's important that the data audit is intended to cover all available data resources relating to disability, covering national statistics, research databases, and administrative data. And in addition to that, the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform are developing an equality data strategy as part of their ongoing work on equality budgeting, which we're closely involved in as well. And we are very strongly supportive of that. Absolutely take the points about the importance of data and the requirement to be able to extract data related to disability, to disaggregate it accordingly, to be able to judge progress in that regard, and particularly for equality budgeting as well. So they are areas that we are highly supportive of and will be pushing ahead with.
Sinead, do you want to come back in?
Sorry, Chair, if I may, but it just gave me the chance to actually remember a couple more points that may be of interest to the committee. Firstly, that in July of this year, there are new obligations coming into force for public bodies with the transposition of the Open Data and Reuse of Public Sector Information Directive. So that will introduce the concept of high-value data sets associated with important benefits for society and economy. So the committee may be interested in that. And then secondly, that the UN Human Rights Council has noted that governments and international actors should start as soon as possible gathering adequate data on the impact of the COVID-19 crisis. So obviously we've just touched on COVID-19, but that's another really important data set for us to look at, both in terms of the pandemic, but also the government response to the pandemic and how that has been impacted. Thank you.